This is LS, and you're on Thorin's YouTube channel, so cut the Western shit.
Right, this is going to be episode 7 of Middle Kingdom Minds. Another 2-man episode. This one's going to be a bit shorter than some of the other episodes, but we'll still get all the big teams covered, don't worry. So let's jump right in here, Raz, which is this week, or like since we did the last show, I guess is a better way to describe it, has been actually the period all split long that I've been waiting for, which is, yes, FPX was undefeated, but we wanted to see them play the top teams. And obviously they played both of them back to back. They played IG, then they played RNG this week. So IG game they won. Great. Obviously nice little scalp to capture. But I want to actually initially talk about the RNG series, because I know a lot of people like yourself kind of have the mentality that, like, give RNG enough time. So, for example, by the playoffs, they should power up and they should be the ultimate boss, you know. Sure, some people favour IG, but I think there's a lot of people from last year still feel like that RNG IG thing was never quite resolved, because they obviously never played each other at Worlds, so we never really got the answer. So here's the thing, right? In the series that FPX lost to RNG, give me your initial thoughts, because I watched this whole series, so I'm quite interested to talk about this one. So come on, what do you think about RNG winning this one?
I think RNG, once again, playing through mid jungle is super interesting, because that's always been the strength of FPX to a certain degree. I always really, gave them, there was always that likeliness between the two teams, that where they were different felt like it was just going to be in the personality of the laners. And I would say a little bit of skill. Like, I thought that Game Goon is a little better than Amazing J in instances. More in most instances. I think Uzi is a lot more experienced and consistent in comparison to LWX, and I think when it comes to major plays, Uzi is a little better in that one as well. And of course, like, both supports are Alistar, like, headstrong and engaged type players, but Ming's vision control is a little bit better. So when it came down to this series, there are two aspects of it. The first one was that DoomB was super separated from the map. Like, it wasn't his choice. Like, in terms of mid jungle, Karsa just won out. They made the ballsier plays around towers, like in terms of like literally diving DoomB under tower. There was one insane dive that they had underneath them because he didn't have flash. So they were like, okay.
I think this was in game 2, right?
I think so too, yeah.
I think so.
I can actually double check while I'm moving on to it, but he like had no flash. He was full HP. He was under tower, and they just chose to dive him. Rek'Sai, Zoe, like, while the wave is coming in too, you have to play that perfectly to get the kill, and he really did. I thought that was one instance where they played
that was
it
game
so
1
well.
apparently, but yeah, okay.
Yeah, and like they played it so well to be able to get the kill, and even in that game, that was a win that for FPX got, like, off of pretty sick team fights in around Baron side. But I really thought that FPX were, like, when it came down to vision control, they failed on that one. They couldn't get a foothold of like major objectives. And then early game, Karsa kept really taking it to Tien. So I thought that was a real first test to Tien, because he was going up against like best jungler in the league at the time. And wasn't able to like push him out.
Okay, well, along these lines then, what you just said there about the gank onto DoomB, that was pretty much a theme of the entire series, if you look at it. Like, they really, first of all, as you said, like, for anyone who hasn't been watching the LPL for the last, like, year or so, bizarrely, RNG doesn't play through Xiaohu a lot of the time, actually. In fact, obviously, they just heavily catered to Uzi. But in this game, not only was Xiaohu, like in that last game, he was massive when he was Syndra, but he also, throughout this series, they were ganking DoomB so much. I mean, what was mad was, the reason you could tell it was a plan is there was even times, like I remember at the beginning of game 3, like it initially looked like DoomB and FPX was going to turn the gank, but it still ended up working out for RNG. So I guess there's a logic to it, right? If you look at the way DoomB plays, he does kind of like set himself up so that then he's like a key part of the team fight, the chances to win, right? So if you put him massively behind in lane, you saw here, FPX never got all those great team fights they get late in the game that you expect them to win on. They were constantly behind in the series.
It was a key thing to how they played, play mid game. Because if we watch every series that FPX has won, it was because Tien and DoomB ended up going top side for Gimgoon or bot side. And a lot of that is like, in other leagues, let's say even, I'll just focus on this league and say Invictus Gaming. Invictus Gaming as a team, Ning doesn't necessarily need to go mid to help Rookie out before he ends up going bottom lane. A lot of the times his gank opportunities come through like side lane, lane ganks, where he goes in through bushes, puts up enough setup for his bottom lane or top lane to recognize that there are no wards been placed in there, gets shoved out, then he can get a gank in the side lane. But Tien doesn't do that. Tien rarely does that. He goes for mid lane 2v2, hard forces it, or like can sneak it through, and then finds a way to take DoinB either top lane and be able to get Gimgoon ahead, or bottom lane so LWX and Crisp are a part of the play. And then when they went up against Invictus Gaming, even though IG ended up beating them, that was the first time that DoinB actually was not given a free push out of the lane. And oftentimes Tien had to think outside the box. And in this one, like, Tien didn't have an option because DoinB was getting dogpiled. So like strategically, you could tell that was a concerted effort that the team was putting into, like, getting Xiaohu ahead, pushing DoinB behind, and making it so FPX always had to work to get their like Gimgoon and LWX ahead. And I think that's something that FPX has struggled with last year when they didn't have mid lane jungle to really work, like mid lane to work with. And it's a lot of resources. I think this is it's a good thing for FPX, but man, RNG was smart to be able to do it, because you're right, they just adapted on the fly. And I think it kind of goes to what RNG did this split. Because RNG this split has started putting a lot more love into Xiaohu. Xiaohu this split has been phenomenal. Like it's actually been insane how well he's been playing and how Karsa has been playing around him. Because like historically, even like the last year, they've just gone through Uzi. If Uzi's on the team, they'll play through bottom lane, gank on it. Like, who the hell cares if Xiaohu's pushing up mid or not? But this time around, they put a lot of love into like playing through mid before they end up going out like bot side.
And another thing that was very impressive to me is when you consider that they, in terms of officials, haven't played that many with Uzi, their actual coordination looked awesome. Like, I can remember a couple of moments. Like, one was when FPX actually won that Baron fight, but then Xiaohu did that amazing flank behind them through like the top red side, through where the red buff actually is. And then obviously later on, there was another time, it was a dragon fight that the FPX guys basically had almost won, but then Uzi was the one member on full health, and it was like, I think I've seen this movie before. I think he's on Vayne and they protect him and he kills everyone, right? Yep, that's as expected. So in many ways, it was like a lot of the highlights of what you want to see from RNG. If you want them to be at full power, they're looking good. Yes,
this is what I wanted to see out of the team. I know a lot of people around the debate of what like makes RNG as a team. Is it amazing? Like, if Amazing J is on the team, do they become worse or better? And my thing was, even though I thought they would be better, I don't even think it matters. That's literally the weakest side of the map. And if he starts inting it up, then sure. But he's a strong enough player that he's going to be reliable to just play his role. And that's all this team ever needed. Because even if, I was about to go somewhere far. I was about to say, even if Wink was playing, then
there we go.
That's not fucking true. That's not true at all. That's a fucking ball-faced lie. I'm never saying that.
That was some bullshit for sure.
That was some bullshit. But man, I think the team, like, their understanding of staggering and like players on the map, back timing, so they can always have presence. So if FPX is like going for a rush Baron or like going for like an Elder Dragon, that's it. Like, they understand no matter what, with how little time that they end up playing together, how to end up playing the map. I think their communication alongside Karsa, Xiaohu, and Uzi, like those three players, and I know Ming is like a major shot caller for the team, and I think he's brings a lot, but just in terms of the core damage front of that team, I think Aladdin, like the four players, doesn't matter who you pair with them, they'll always be successful.
Right, even though RNG did look better overall over the series, like if you look especially at game 2, FPX had a chance to win this series. Like they had like a few opportunities, and if you add that to them beating IG, what do you think we've learned from seeing FPX against the two top teams, as it were?
I think they're a contender. Like, at first I was really doubtful with this team. When going into the Invictus Gaming series, I was like, I don't know about this team. They have a lot of holes that they need to really repair. And I think when they went up against IG and later up against RNG, they showed to me that they're a team that really has the mechanics. Like, they're a mechanically strong team. Reminds me a lot like Rogue Warriors. I mean, I already knew that, but going up against the best is when you truly understand that they don't have that fear. They're not going to get blown out like some of the other teams, like some of the hopefuls that I've had in the past. I think another aspect of it too is that while they are able to play slow well behind, and that's something that's beneficial, what dings them is that their identity as a team oftentimes align with another. So they're not like a BLG that has a very key identity that they can play through against any other team. I think when they go up against RNG, they need to recognize in a playoff setting, they need to come up with something like a different kind of strategy, like a different kind of champion that makes it so they can, like that RNG doesn't understand like in 5 games in a series at most, what FPX is trying to accomplish. Because I think RNG is essentially like, if we're just talking about like in a general term, they're FPX but a little bit better. Because if we're talking about what FPX is trying to accomplish, early game 2v2 through mid game they try to heavily leverage mid lane pressure to get bottom lane turret and move LWX and Crisp along and allow Crisp to get like some mode or avenue through mid lane, so they can either go make a play underneath mid lane tower or try and make play topside. And then in late game team fights, they end up playing through major objectives and have I was just saying, through team fights they play through the same thing, but the key difference being Gimgoon versus Amazing J on side lanes, where Amazing J almost certainly is going to rotate to the fight to be a major tank and creating space, while Gimgoon is, I would say he's more talented. That's just like in terms of mechanical skill, that's fair. But with just champion pool, he brings in some variance, like because he comes in with Gangplank, like he has a lot of key carry options. He's played Vladimir in the past, so I know he's going to be able to pick that one up with a lot of Vladimir players currently playing. So he is a major carry type player. So I want to see what he can bring, but I think there's more stability in what kind of pick ban that RNG has been rolling out with. So my big point is if this team's coming into a best of 5 versus RNG, they do need to bring out something special, because RNG right now can out team fight them, and RNG right now has debatably better like player core, because FPX is supposed to be known for like just being able to mechanically outplay a lot of these team fights, because they're very strong players. So structure doesn't really matter. They can play chaotic team fights and it works out for them. But other than like Gimgoon versus Amazing J, across the board, I would say that you have more talent. I know the only big question is literally Doinb versus Shahu, but my God, does that not matter? like it is so close between those two players that then you start looking across the board and you're like, okay, LWX versus Uzi, Crisp and Ming, and a lot of the times it just feels like RNG has more structure behind them, that the talent comes out a little bit more obvious.
Are you concerned about where IG is at the moment? Because like, it's one thing if you just lose the occasional match. And in fact, I think if you even look at IG, I kind of expect them to lose the odd game, just like kind of in Europe, like G2 does. When you play like really aggressively and around individual players, and you go for players, you're going to lose games off that, in the same way you're going to win games. But they've lost a lot of series this split, and some of them have been to not the top teams. I mean, they've lost to Jingdong. They've obviously lost to FPX earlier on before people knew if FPX. Obviously, the most ridiculous one was they lost to LGD. Are there concerns here?
I think there are. There are a lot of good points to be made on the fact that Invictus Gaming are not playing like playoff mode. I guess that's one way to put it. That's kind of a joke ever since LeBron has put that one out there recently. But but Invictus Gaming at the moment in time, like if I'm just looking at the competition, if I'm saying RNG has had their number in the past, BLG I think is a team that is actually really strong around Kuro, Jin Zhao, and I know we'll talk about them soon enough. But like, yeah, sure, that's a team where I could say that in that series, in a best of 3, that I would start really saying that BLG has a chance of winning that, because there's far more structure in their game, and they play through like pretty much like the same. They play straight through mid, but slow the game down. That's something that Invictus Gaming really are afraid of. TOP, we already know like that. So like just based off the core talent in terms of like competition this year in comparison to the last, IG has it cut out for them. Like there's
blood in the water now, right?
Yes. This time around, there's people have studied what Invictus Gaming has done. And I think TOP, FPX have been teams that were built primarily to fight an Invictus Gaming going into this one. I think it was well built as a squad and that it's really coming together. Even though TOP lost that first series versus them, if we're looking against like playoff time once again, that's a real best of 5 that you have to be worried about. So it's kind of crazy. It's real crazy.
Okay, since you brought them up then, let's talk about Bilibili Gaming, because they're a team that we've only talked about on and off because their table placing didn't really warrant it up until now.
Yeah.
But first of all, they just beat Sunning, so that counts for something. But I feel like this is like a dual one, because on the one hand, it makes Bilibili look legit, especially because obviously the MVPs were the 2 Korean players, the ones you want to see pop off. But then on the other side of the equation, the Sunning factor, that's dying quickly now, Raz. That like the hope for Sunning, it's fading at this point. So give me the upside first. What do you think of BLG then?
Upside is BLG is looking so good around there. Like their play style, they've been a team that I was wondering, is like Kuro going to play to the fast, aggressive LPL style, or is he going to try and slow the game down, try and play a more LCK style? And the answer is funny enough, both. Like in the sense that like the team style is an LCK play style. I think they're a team that has such an extended laning phase. Like really boil it down to like how well is laning phase going? For Kuro, it's going well. For ADD, even though like often he never picks for good lanes, but ADD plays such a good laning phase while behind. If he's on weak side, a lot of the times he's able to keep up in lane and find a way through it to make plays for himself. And then Jin Zhao is just a great team fighter. So it boils down to how well their team fight is. And to point that out, like they have been so sick around team fights. ADD is a boss, man. ADD and Kuro have been so damn sick together. Like the fact that ADD and is able to speak like basic Chinese to the team is only been with, like that's crazy too. It's very simple Chinese, but like with them being in the country for about 9 weeks now, it's really impressive.
Baller, yeah.
I know.
Especially because obviously as a player, like he's not someone who really did anything in Korea. He's one of those people, you would think is kind of like a write-off, but he's kept finding a place for himself in the LPL.
Yeah, he's real finding like his play style is real nice. And when he went up against Suning, like not only did he just smash Xiao Ao in lane in poor matchups too, matchups that Xiao Ao should be winning, even if just by a little. He was able to set up Kuro quite a bit, and then his flanks were perfect. I thought that ADD had the series of his life. I've never seen a better Poppy play or a Sion play. I thought he just straight smashed the series. So like you get that out of ADD sometimes. And Kuro this split has played about 6 assassin games, which is the most assassins he's ever played in his life. So like for a team that's slowing it down, Kuro is starting to find a new style, and that's something that I loved. That makes a lot of sense that both Kuro and ADD got the MVP that series.
Right, being as BLG has yet to play most of the big names. They haven't played IG, RNG, TOP. They haven't even played EDG. Yeah. Right, which of these teams could they actually beat? Like, who would you project they'd have a good shot against, or who would they match up well against at least?
I think So the one that they would end up matching well enough to beat, I think it would be both EDG, IG, and I would even give them TOP. In sense, like if I'm talking about like percentage chance of victory,
okay,
I would say 60% chance they beat EDG. I'd give them a 60% chance. I'll give them a 50. Wow, that one's hard. Against IG, I'll say 50. I think right now with how Invictus Gaming is playing, they're creating too many holes in their playstyle, and that will give a chance for BLG to play through some of these team fights that IG in the last year have kind of never been the best at. Even though they're the best team,
just never needed to, though, right?
Yeah, exactly. And there's been some messiness involved with how, like, some of Ning and Bao Lang's engages or when they think is the right time to fight. I think it's the whole team. They at times will try and look for fights that they think they can outplay, and I think against BLG that might give them some headaches. Against TOP, my God, I actually think that's a 45% chance of them winning, but like the fact that it's that close, I still think is kind of crazy because going into the season, I thought they were like going to be an 8th or 7th place team. Yeah. And to be fair, I still think they dropped down to 5th place, and I think RNG take their spot. But BLG as a team has been really impressing me.
Because obviously, like I alluded to before, the cool thing is that like BLG has emerged exactly the moment when like That game was the last straw for me with Sonning Raz. Like, I'm out on Sonning now. Like, I wanted to believe so badly. I agreed with you. I thought it was the super team, mate. I thought this was going to be like the genius team out of nowhere that's constructed and immediately they go right to the top. But has not played out like that. And in fact, probably the saddest thing is not only do they lose all the big series pretty much, but you can see by the way they keep changing the roster that they themselves, like, there's some sort of internal issue. Like, they haven't figured out what their identity is supposed to be.
Yeah, I think to the core of gameplay, like, if we're just talking about play style, Maple has been exposed in an LPL mid lane pool. Like, in terms of laning phase, he falls behind a lot. And a lot of the times when there's a gank that he follows up, that most players will either just like leave it, he tends to overchase it. So I think for him, he has a lot of difficulties, which is why I like Angel being a threat, because I think both players can like really push each other. But yeah, in terms of play style, that's weird, because Suning in the past, if I'm talking about like Suning with Hacker, Xiao Al, and what their old team has been like, they have been the perfect early game team. They have been a team that's like first 15 minutes, you say they're the best at across like the league. They may be like a 6th place team or whatever and struggling to go up against the best, but their problem has always been shutting out games with those two players. And what's made them so good is that they can smash top lane and then leave the lane and maybe look for a TP bottom lane. But I think the addition of a new shot caller like Sordar, the addition of the voice of Maple as well in SMLZ, who oftentimes like ends up playing a lot more passively than how Fury and Yoon ends up playing in the past, that has changed it up, because now Xiao Al and Hacker don't look to gank topside anymore. Their early game tends to be, whilst they still can like inch a lead, Hacker plays through mid a little bit more often and has been struggling to be able to get advantages there. So I think for Hacker, he has now had a question mark where last year it was like, just I know where I'm going every game. First blood top lane percentage is the highest in the league. Now this time around, it's like he has been struggling to find a way or a lane to get ahead. He can't be bottom lane, and most of the time when how their compositions has been rolling out, top lane has been difficult too.
Right, being as since we did the last episode, like TOP has only played against Vici and it wasn't particularly inspiring series. How about this? One of the next matchups, in fact, it'll basically probably be completed by the time people watch this video, is going to be FPX versus TOP. So another big time game for FPX to see what they're made of. And obviously TOP themselves potentially want to be the next big contender. So preview this game for us. What should we expect?
Oh my God. It should just be big focus on team fights through mid. I know that FPX, they played through mid jungle, as I already said, and they pretty much rely on that. That's been a strength for TOP as well, where I know like the top 3 teams, we've been talking about mid jungle so much, but with how strong these mid laners are, like Shahu, and in this case, it's going to be Doombi versus Knight. Knight so far has been the MVP leader of the league.
Oh, by the way, that is so sick, that nickname he has of like the golden left hand. That is some straight like kung fu shit. I love that. I love that nickname. It's so good. Literally
coming in his technical rookie. Like, he's coming in like fresh face, and they gave him the biggest nickname. That's why I love the Chinese community. The Chinese community, they can find a nickname for you fast, man. They're good with those. And he's earned it. Like, the man is a king. He is right now the best performing player in the league. Sometimes a little under the radar because TOP games end up finding themselves outside I would say majority of the English broadcast games. So this time around, we're going to see TOP actually have a bit of a run. But in this FPX series, Xiangsong XX and Knight are going to play through mid. They're going to primarily find a better matchup. They always do. They have a really flexible mid lane champion pool. They'll likely go Corki or Jace here, and I think that they'll be able to like chip at mid lane tower quite frequently, and then look for package plays bottom lane. Like, it's crazy how Corki found its way into the LPL meta in 9.2 when like the whole crit changes never even went off, and that was because Knight was like, I'm just gonna play him anyways. I'm just a great Corki player. I can control the pace of the game for my team, so I'll play Corki, and the rest of the league will end up picking it up because they'll either take it away from me or realize that, wait a minute, this champion is good without the crit changes involved. So I think that this new patch has definitely benefited Knight in this meta, and Doomby is going to receive the same amount of threat that he had in the previous series. It's going to be hard for Doomby going forward, knowing that like the gank mid strategy worked when it was RNG versus them, and about every team will see that and start to employ the same thing.
Yeah, actually, along those lines, what you mentioned there, I thought was an interesting detail to bring up, which is that if you look at Knight's champion pool for this split, it's basically, it looks like you're watching the LEC, because you know in LEC, because they've got all the good mid laners, that's famously what they do there. They all try and counter each other all day long. Well, the thing is, in LPL, you know, even people like Rookie, they might just play like 9 champions, 10 champions. This guy's played like so many different champions. He's only played, like the most he's played a single champion is 3 times.
Mm-hmm.
That's ridiculous.
That's insane. He is the pure counter picker. There'll be some people that will be like, you know what, Zoe has like an 8% win rate.
Sure.
I'm just going to play Zoe all day. And he technically he can do that because he's just such a sick Zoe player. But then the next game, he'll be like, nah, I'll play Jace. Same identity, but I'm like, it's comforting for me. So it feels like sometimes he puts himself on a different champion that has the same identity, just get some mileage on it before like a best of 5. So Knight, you can't really you can't stick him down on the champion. And it feels like on red side, I know we talk red side Rookie, but red side Knight right now is pretty threatening.
Right. Even though I thought this was a team I was done talking about, Raz, they just keep sucking me back in. LGD, they actually make me care about them, Raz. Why is this? My boy Kramer actually still has the exact same identity from the LCK, by the way, which is like, give me hyper carry and all the gold. It's like, I've heard that story from a lot of AD carries, but I have to say, I'll give credit to Kramer. He will carry sometimes if you do that. If you give him what he wants, he will carry games like he did here.
Yes. Kramer is a god, man. I like when I watch LCK, sometimes the game gets too slow paced where I'm like, okay, he's got to another late game. Like, that's not going to happen in the LPL. LPL, you're going to get challenged way too early. He's still playing the early games good too. Like, every Kramer is just a good player, and I've just got to accept it. They should have won the Suning series is what breaks my heart. Like, this would have put, like, if they, just so everyone knows right now, like, I was out in a restaurant, I was having hot pot with the boss and everyone, and then LPL was still on, and I was like, you know, I'll watch some LPL. I'm going to be that guy that's like, watching like the baseball game while everyone's like socializing. And I was just giving them updates. I was like, LGD's in game 2 and they're a game up on Suning. And I was like, LGD just got Baron buff, Elder Dragon, and they're pushing for the win. I was like, LGD's about to beat Suning. They later took down EDG. And of course, in the Suning one, they didn't. They lost a bottom lane fight. They ended up like getting pushed. They lost Baron. They ended up losing the game and then eventually the series, which broke my heart. But LGD look real good right now. And like,
so how are they doing this then? They're the last place team in the LPL. This shouldn't be happening.
I don't get it, dog. Like, there's always that indication. Like, if it was like 2 years ago, you'll be like, no one cares anymore. Like, playoff time's coming up, but people do care. I think LGD. I said coming into the split that like Condi. Like the changes.
He seems to have turned his fucking career around as well, right?
Yes, but I think that Condi was going to be a major like influence on the team and getting like the team together again. Like in terms of shot calling, getting them on the right path. And even though they brought in a little bit more of Amy, like that jungler as well, coming right back into the team, I still think that the general structure of LGD has changed. And that's all everybody. If you're an LGD fan, that's all you've been wanting, man. You've been wanting fresh faces and a new coaching staff where UDJ, the coach for the team, has been like super helpful. He was already leading this team in the right path in the summer split when they were getting better and starting to take more wins. And finally, it feels like there's pressure on the team to succeed and compete, where in the past it just wasn't the case.
Okay. Right. Another team that I want to talk about is Jingdong, who I notice they don't particularly have any like hype games on the marquee coming up soon, like that. And if you look at where they are in the table, they're sort of about where you'd expect them to be. You know, like they're in contention for a playoff spot. They're not a top team. Like the real question with Jingdong is this: how far off the pace do you think they actually are from the top teams?
I think they're pretty far, and I think the reason for it is because their bottom lane right now is still suffering. Imp is still getting better, and I think if he gets to team fights, it's not an issue. It's just that hole in the early game is too big. And there are a lot of teams that have a bottom lane that doesn't necessarily look to perform. I say Suning, but at least with Suning that they get themselves reliable early game leads, but it almost feels like Imp ends up throwing the gold away, or like Bafoy isn't reliable in team fights. So if you're just talking about the best JD, I think best JD is Imp if he doesn't end up like dying in early laning phase and has a monstrous team fight on his Kai'Sa. And so that's all I'm calling for, man. Because Zoom is having the best year of his career, but it's almost like he needs to put up those numbers. He needs to be the person who's carrying the resources for them to succeed.
Do you think that, because I noticed that is the interesting thing, is they did try bringing in Bavoy a few times, and I know there were some people even thought, because obviously like Imp's reputation is kind of in the toilet at the moment, some people thought he should be the starter anyway, but as you said, they've both been kind of a bit flawed. So where do you, if anyone hasn't seen Imp in the last few years, where is he at in his career? Like, do you still see flashes where you could believe he could be like a dominant carry player in team fights?
Oh, hell yeah. I think his team fighting is still very strong. Like his team fight IQ is like something that hasn't withered away. I think I had a lot of faith of Imp going into this split because I thought that the problems on LGD wasn't necessarily Imp. It was like actually just the structure of the team. If you have somebody that's if there's competitive like environment for you to perform, then suddenly that he will still look to perform within his games. And even in a lot of those LGD games that weren't performing, I blame the facilitators rather than the carries. I thought Yuki and Imp still performed at that time, but like that's neither here nor there for a losing team. Right now for Imp, his team fights are still strong. If you find yourself even versus JD and Imp is on Kai'Sa, then he will play those team fights well enough. He may not be better than I'll compare him to Kramer, because I think like there are people who are a lot more consistent and have like that playmaking factor. Sure. But I think Imp is super reliable, and that's something that they just need in that team fight.
Okay, so another team that we haven't had to touch on too much in the last few weeks, but surprisingly, they're actually mid-table, is WE. They're actually alive still. They finally started to get together. So being as they also play a game that will be done by the time this is done, they play IG. Give us like a preview of like what can WE potentially do against IG?
Oh my god, man. Well, it's going to be bloody. Like, this is going to be a lot of fights. Bei Shang, the new jungler for this team, he's a little bit straightforward, and I think this team really needed it. So, Rookie's going to be there's going to be first blood mid, and it's going to be CA and Bei Shang getting the kill on Rookie, because even though that's been a Rookie and Ning like forte, I think right now they're pretty bloodthirsty on getting CA and Mystic ahead. Bei Shang has a lot of great direction. I think he's someone that needs to play a lot more games with the team. He reminds me a lot of Pepper, actually. So that's something that WE needed. They needed to hold on to Pepper, but when they lost him, that play style that gets those two carries ahead is going to win them a game. I think they will win a game. When they played up against Snake, it wasn't clean. That's when you see Snake versus WE, it's never going to be clean. There are some 50-50s that you look into and you're like, all right, well, whoever if there's a smite steal on this parent objective, and there wasn't, like, I think there was one smite steal and then the second one was like just a regular, like it didn't work out. The W ended up winning the series. IG is definitely a more complex team, better communication throughout. So IG will win, but if we're just talking about what to look out for is early game aggression. WE is one of the bloodiest teams 15-20 minutes into the game, while Invictus Gaming are just the bloodiest team, period, in the league. So like that's going to be something where both teams will just challenge each other early.
Right, being as you mentioned Pepper, I actually did plan that we would talk about Victory 5. And the reason why is, I'll give you some props here, right? If people look at where they are on the table, they're going to think, why the fuck are you talking about this team? Because this team has played almost all the top teams, and that's where all the losses come from. Like, all their losses are playoff teams. Then you look at the lower teams, they're beating them. And actually, even some of the top teams, they have the occasional chance to win a game. So, being as the only top, like, big names they haven't played is like FPX. I think there's one more they haven't played. I'm trying to think who
that's
it could be.
EDG.
EDG.
Yeah.
And then I guess it's debatable whether Sunning's even a top team, but those three teams are the one they haven't played yet. Right? Yes. Being as some of those teams, EDG, obviously Sunning, a little bit more vulnerable, this is where you could make a genius call. Do you think actually that Victory 5 is going to beat any of these teams?
Ooh.
Because they look a lot better than their record. Like, it feels like one... Like, I'll give you the example. The opposite to V5 is obviously the Xeno Dragons team, because they got their wins off having an easy schedule, and now it's starting to level out again. V5 look like they're going to go the other direction, and they're going to, like, finish just outside a playoff spot, maybe.
That's the whole game right now. The 8th place spot is super coveted, and I think the team's fighting for it. Like, for instance, the fact that Suning and Victory 5 are likely not going to pick it up is crazy to me. So I think it's hard to say, man. They won't win the EDG one because their biggest strength is going up is their top lane, and Ray is a beast right now. He's actually just the best top laner at the moment, which I never thought I would say.
What's changed from the past?
Well, there was one thing was the setup towards top lane, so he wasn't getting the pressure, and number 2 was that Ray was just making really really bad decisions when he was on weak side. So there have been 2 things that's changed, is that when he's on weak side, he's super respectful, but now he's just not on weak side anymore. It seems like they've just given him priority compared to like mid and bot lane. So it's now EDG playing through Scout and Ray, and so Ray recognizes he can just play aggressively no matter what and doesn't have to worry about consequences. So he's just been mechanically more sound, and then EDG has given him more pressure. So like that's a pretty strong combination at the moment. So I think Victory 5 will lose that series, and I think they'll lose the one versus FPX. I think versus Suning they have a good chance of winning. So I think at some point I've got to stop believing in this team. So actually I'm going to be like just looking at the last few series that Victory 5 have. I pegged them losing versus almost all of them. I think they're going to be a team that's just going to be finishing just outside playoff spot with Suning.
In context, that's still pretty decent, though.
Yeah, that's true. I wonder now. I'm gonna like look back at my past because I'm pretty sure, like where I put them in this team. I had them preseason. I had them 11th place. Right now, they're sitting at 11th place, and I think realistically that they're just gonna sit there for a little bit too. So I don't think they're gonna sit worse than where Snake, Vici, and everyone else is. And I don't think they're going to get above Team WE or Sino Dragons or Suning for that matter. So I think that's pretty comfortable for them at the moment.
Okay. Right. There are actually some nice matchups for next week that just individually I want to get your take on before the end of the episode. So
all right.
Suning has another big test because they have to play TOP, right?
That's true.
I have you written Suning off when they play these top teams? Like matchup wise, can they go head to head with TOP?
I think they can. I write them off in the series, but I think for the games, the matchups are always there. So like Xiao should always still do well in his lane. Hacker should always still know where the have a good imagery with the junglers and still path in the right direction. SMLZ and Sword Art should still be able to get to the mid game or like late game while having a lead or still keeping an even. So like those states still come true, and Suning still find themselves with early game leads. The only issue is like what then Suning, and the fact that that's been a problem with the shot calling that's come in is an indictment on some of the shot callers. And Maple is the only one that ends up coming up with a deficit. So like a lot of the times, then you start focusing on the players. So it's a tough one. I think TOP has a better idea of their players' roles. So even though I talked up Xiao 369 in that series is still going to come off. So it's going to be tough. And if we're just talking about individuals, TOP has that and team play.
Right. What about the other game that the Suning guys play, which is against Jingdong, who obviously that's kind of a team around their level now. Like, that is their peers. So that's got to be a tight one as an outsider. But who would your pick be?
I think Suning's going to take it. I think that's me coming up for an underdog. Suning has that series because that's always been a really close matchup, as you've said. But I think JD will let you go to team fights because that's been something that JD's really never been able to seal the deal on Zoom's advantage. And then Suning, even though a lot of the times their like positioning errors can come through, Xiao Al can always threaten flanks, and that's something that they like at the moment. I think we're still seeing Imp have to really deal with. If it's just straight front to back, then that works out well for Imp and JD. But flanks has been something Imp has having to deal with in the previous series. So Xiao should be able to have that avenue if he doesn't go for the Jace.
Okay. Right, let's do this then. Because there's a bunch of teams that, because they've just been permanent bottom dwellers on the rankings, we never get to talk about them. Right?
Okay.
I'll list off a few. Just pick one, and then the one that immediately interests you, or there's something you can tell us of interest. So between Snake, Vici, OMG, and Rogue Warriors, which one do you want to talk about?
I'll go with Snake, funny enough.
Okay. A team that many people have written off since years ago. What's still appealing about them? What's interesting?
So they're still making acquisitions. They just made one right like a few days ago, and they're gonna play him today. So I actually get to find out how well he is. Fen is their new mid laner now, because them as a team have been trying to identify what their mid lane is going to be for the squad. They brought in, like in the preseason, they brought in Mala, and Mala has been reasonably he's been the worst mid laner in the league, and communication's been a problem for him too. So if he's trying to play a supportive style with not being able to communicate with like the rest of the team, and his mechanics aren't on to par for the league, that's just an unsuccessful combination. And then alongside that, I have like Andy's been their other player that they've kind of been using. But even though the communication is there for him, he is way too much of a sink or swim player, and he's way too green. So bringing in Fen, the former Suning mid laner, like from when they first promoted into the league, he is a player he was initially known as a two-trick in the sense that he plays Kassadin exceptionally, and he plays Aurelia really well. And on top of that, like if you lose those picks, he plays super supportive, like Galio. At times you play like Karma, something that would always help out another major member of the team, and that's something that Snake has been really wanting. So I think Fen really gives them both things of communication and better mechanical skill in comparison to Andy and Mala. So that should be giving them a bit of a boost right from the get-go and make them a team that should, like, if I'm looking at their current series, RNG, no, they're losing that one. But but in terms of like versus Victory 5 or Team WE, like if they had the chance to go through those series again, that would be a Snake series that I think that they should go much farther. I would say Snake would be favored versus Team WE actually, which sucks because they just lost that one.
Sure. Right, what is the overall identity of Snake nowadays? Because obviously in the old days it was the Flandre show. Hasn't really, I have to say, been like such a great meta for him. Even though to carry top meta, I don't really feel as though he's gotten off. So what's been the issues, do you think?
Issue's been consistency around mid jungle, because once again, that's the core of the map. So even though for a lot of these teams it seems like that's been a strength that they've been utilizing, that's something Snake can't utilize. So every single time Flandre finds himself with a lead, or if he's slightly behind and he's trying to scale up, then he faces 3 people on him on tower. And so like he's either getting pressured super early on, or he can't use his pressure early enough to end up going through a top lane dive. So in the past, he's been able to just say, okay, we'll go for a TP play bot lane. But that just hasn't been something that they've been setting up well enough. So like right now that's probably a frustration for him, who's been doing all right. But their identity has been through Asura, who's been so good. Like their AD carry, who's like a rookie this split, has just been phenomenal in team fights. So I think they've been a team that's been forming up to be a late game team fighting team, just because they can rely on their AD carry to play through well.
Is SOFM still a meme?
Yeah, man, that guy ain't changing. Like he's not changing, man. Like that's what's so like he can bring out his picks, and he is so hilarious sometimes.
In his own way, he's got a charm to him, hasn't he?
Yes. There was a game, I think it was the WE series. Yeah, he was. He picks Lee Sin, he goes top lane for a dive. It doesn't work out. Like he meets the Jarvan and like before he gets under tower. He dies under tower, takes a tower shot. He's like, okay, well that's interesting. We're the LPL, we're gonna replay everything. We replay that, and then it goes back to we go back to live. It's literally the same spot. He dies in the same spot to the same player. I was like, we just replayed that. Like, did he literally just like revive, come straight back to the same spot to make the same play, and then die in the same manner? I was like, that's actually the most hilarious thing. SOFM is like super one track minded. he is an excellent player. He has like the one track mindedness, but God Almighty, if it doesn't work the first time, you better believe he's gonna try it again. So that's the charm of SOFM, and like you got to be able to deal with that downside with him. So it's beautiful to watch, man.
Right, one question I have, one of the areas I always want to ask people about is when like regions have a pick that doesn't really see much play elsewhere. And one of the ones I noticed in China is top lane Gangplank is still a thing, which barely sees play anywhere else around the world. So what is the logic behind why they use it, or what do they try to use it for?
Game time, a lot of the time, it feels like it's extending. I think there are two things about this. Number one is that the top lane has been fairly like inactive. Like you can actually get out of the laning phase pretty easily, even picking up some pretty poor matchups. There are some teams that are pretty relentless, so they will dive you underneath tower, and that'll make it hard for you. There are other teams that just have great GP players. Like if North America had a great GP player, then they would probably be in play GP because of how long these games end up going, or how hectic the games end up going. But in the LPL, you have great GP players. And then like with Xiao Al and in particular Gimgoon. And on top of that, the games are getting longer, where early on in the split, there was a lot of poor coordination. So there was no reason and no way you're playing GP, where you really need the coordination to set up alongside the GP ultimate. And then like just a great GP player to be able to have him join fights and link up barrels. And I think right now the game time has been extended. So GP's able to get to his major item points. And team coordination is not an issue week 7 into the split. So you've been getting a lot more of that.
Right, being as all the other regions are obviously now powering up for the playoffs, like Korea's almost there, Europe's almost there, and it's a couple of weeks behind, but they're coming in themselves. Everyone's already projecting forwards and looking. I mean, you've already seen the discussion mainly tends to be a Flame NA, to be like, oh, they'll get wrecked by all the teams at MSI, etc.
Yeah.
So the question for me is this. I notice whenever those fans have that discussion of like, well, if they play Griffin and G2, I notice they all get stuck on the LPL one because they don't watch the LPL. So half of them are like, it's going to be IG again, right? It's like, I don't know about that at the moment, guys. I'd maybe hold off on that one. RNG could still happen. They're looking good, right? If you had your choice, just in terms of like matching up against the other regions and potentially representing China the best, if you could send a team today to MSI, who would you send?
Oh my God. I would send...
Not OMG, just in case anyone's wondering. He definitely didn't mean OMG, obviously. That would be a troll pick. Who would you want? Who would you want to go to like really rep China well?
Ooh, I would send... based off of current performance, I think RNG would be our best bet. Like in terms of just raw consistency right now, RNG would be it. Sure. Otherwise, I would say TLP. Like TLPs probably are like the team that has our highest highs, that can just rock you in lane and probably have the best way to like contest you in major objectives. So that's a two-parter, but I'll just say in terms of like, I'll throw RNG out. I think for right now, be TLP. Right now, TLP.
Sure.
I think TLP has the better players and better team play.
Well, what would definitely be cool if you could send TLP is obviously no one's expecting anyone other than IG and RNG. So if that team went, first of all, people who are for the global audience won't know the team as well. And then crucially, they're probably going to think like, how good is this team anyway? Like, I'd just like to see some of these Midlands who don't know Knight actually see him play. Like, that could be fun. Like, I'm kind of with you on that one. RNG's kind of the boring but safe answer. But if TLP went, I could even see a world where they do really well as well.
Yeah, I would think they do well. I think that the biggest matchup for them would just be like everyone would say the same thing. If they go up against Griffin, that's going to be the hardest one. But I think TLP right now, they are so raw and confident that they'll 100% take down North America, Europe. I think the only question is like when they go up against a G2, how well Caps is going to play up against them. But I think Knight plays out so well in lane that he ends up forcing your style out. I think XX, like the jungle has always been the difference in the past in international events where like Broxa versus Ning handle that one pretty easily. Sure. And then when it was Xmithy versus, they were like during group stages, Xmithy couldn't really handle Haro early on in that series. And I feel like this time around, XX is just such a strong direct player playing through mid and top lane. Top lane, his jungle proximity is super high there. So that's something most teams will not be able to handle, and I think Griffin would have problems keeping Sword just alive. I think that's going to be a real problem. So I would give it to TOP in the Griffin's game. If it's a best of one setting in group stages, I would give it to TOP. There's just a lot of surprise factor, and they're too talented.
This video was supported by Dean Tanglis, Andreas Snazore Westerlund, James Harding, NateDOhDoubleG, OllieJ, Tobias Bernasconi, Travis Greb, Tristan Jones, Daniel Olivar, Jiangheng Lu, and special thanks, as always, goes out to Jerky's Minion, one of my OGs. Do you want to suggest a topic or a guest for my content? Maybe you want to ask me a question. I have a monthly AMA. Perhaps you want teasers for who the next guests are on my upcoming talk shows. Maybe you want to be part of my monthly discussion where my top patrons talk to me. Well, put your money where your mouth is and join the Scrilluminati today at the description box link for Patreon.